General Haijin stood before the massive viewing window of her personal quarters aboard the military station. The stars looked the same as they always did, but something felt different today. Her aide knocked on the door and entered without waiting for permission. "General, you have received an urgent message from the Galactic Council," the young officer said. Holding out a datapad with shaking hands, Haijin took the device and read the message quickly. Her face remained calm, but inside she felt a familiar cold feeling in her stomach. The council was calling for an emergency war meeting. The subject was simple, the human problem. She had been expecting this call for months. The humans had been expanding their territory faster than anyone had predicted. What started as a small species confined to one solar system had grown into something much bigger. They now controlled dozens of star systems and showed no signs of stopping. The message was short and direct. All senior military commanders were required to attend immediately. The meeting would take place on Nexus Prime Station, the largest military facility in known space. Transportation would be provided. Haijin set down the datapad and looked at her reflection in the dark window. Her face showed the scars of many battles. 3 thin lines ran across her left cheek, a gift from human plasma fire during their first encounter. Her right arm bore the marks of shrapnel from a human explosive device. These were reminders of lessons learned the hard way. "Prepare my ship," she told her aide. "We leave within the hour." "Yes, General." "Should I inform the crew of our destination?" "Tell them we are going to discuss the humans," Haijin said quietly. "That should be enough." The journey to Nexus Prime took 2 days. During the trip, Haijin spent most of her time reading reports about recent human activities. The news was not good for the other species in the galaxy. Every report told the same story. Human forces were moving fast and hitting hard. They were taking systems that should have been impossible to capture. What worried Haijin most was not what the humans were doing, but how the other species were reacting. Most commanders still treated humans like a minor threat. They talked about human technology as if it was primitive. They laughed at human tactics as if they were the actions of children playing war games. Haijin knew better. She had fought humans before. She had lost ships, soldiers, and nearly her own life learning about what humans could do in battle. The scars on her body were proof that humans were not to be taken lightly. When her ship arrived at Nexus Prime, Haijin was amazed by the size of the gathering. Ships from 6 different species filled the docking bays. This was the largest military meeting she had ever seen. The council was taking the human situation seriously, even if individual commanders were not. The war chamber was a huge round room with a holographic display in the center. Representatives from each species sat at designated areas around the room. Haijin recognized most of the faces. These were the best military minds in the galaxy. Generals and admirals who had won countless battles against various enemies. Admiral Taeho of the Velkan Confederation stood at the center podium. He was tall and confident, with the bearing of someone who had never lost a major battle. His species had the most advanced technology in the galaxy, and he clearly believed that made them superior to everyone else. "Fellow commanders," Taeho began, his voice carrying easily through the large room. "We are here to discuss the human expansion and what we should do about it." The holographic display activated, showing a map of human-controlled space. Red dots marked human colonies and military bases. The display showed how human territory had grown over the past 5 years. It was impressive, but Haijin noticed that the other commanders did not seem worried. "As you can see," Taeho continued, "the humans have been busy. They now control 47 star systems, up from just 1 system 5 years ago. Their military forces have grown from a single planetary defense force to a fleet of over 300 ships." Commander Sumin of the Draxian Republic raised her hand. She was young for her rank, probably promoted quickly due to her family connections rather than battle experience. "Admiral, with respect, I do not see why this requires such an urgent meeting," Sumin said with a smile. 300 ships is not a large fleet? My own forces number over 800 ships, and that is just one battle group. Several other commanders nodded in agreement. Captain Dongwu of the Nexari hegemony leaned back in his chair and laughed. The humans still use kinetic weapons, Dongwu said loudly. Bullets and missiles like something from a museum. My ships have plasma shields that can stop anything they can throw at us. More laughter filled the room. Haijin remained silent, watching the display and listening to her colleagues dismiss the human threat. She had heard all of these arguments before, usually right before someone lost a battle to human forces. Admiral Tejo waited for the room to quiet down before continuing. While human technology may seem primitive, their expansion rate is concerning. Intelligence reports suggest they are planning to move into the Kepler sector next. That sector contains resources that several of our species need. Let them come, said General Wu Jin of the Altarian Empire. My forces can handle a few human ships. Their tactics are chaotic and unpredictable. They fight like animals instead of proper soldiers. The room erupted in more laughter and confident chatter. Commanders began sharing stories about human encounters, always emphasizing how strange and primitive human methods seemed. They talked about humans like they were discussing an interesting but harmless species they had discovered. Haijin listened to it all without speaking. She had heard the same confident words from her own mouth years ago, before her first battle with human forces. Back then, she had been just as certain that superior technology and proper military training would easily defeat the humans. She touched the scars on her face unconsciously as she remembered that first encounter. The memory was still clear in her mind. She had commanded a force of 12 ships against what intelligence said was a single human patrol vessel. The battle should have lasted minutes. Instead, it had lasted hours and cost her half her fleet. Admiral Tejo was now asking each commander for their assessment of the human threat. One by one, they stood and gave confident reports about how easily their forces could defeat human expansion efforts. They talked about superior weapons, better training, and more advanced tactics. When Tejo reached the Kaleri Empire section, he looked directly at Haijin. She had been quiet throughout the entire meeting, not joining in the laughter or confident predictions. General Haijin, Tejo said, his voice carrying a slight tone of curiosity. You have been unusually quiet today. The Kaleri Empire has had more contact with human forces than most other species. What is your assessment? The room grew quiet as all eyes turned to Haijin. She could feel the weight of their attention. These commanders expected her to join their confident chorus, to add her voice to their dismissive evaluation of human capabilities. Instead, Haijin stood slowly and looked around the room. She saw young faces full of confidence, experienced officers who had never fought humans, and political appointees who had never seen real battle at all. Should I sit this one out, she said quietly, or speak from experience? The question hung in the air like a challenge. The room was completely silent now, waiting for her answer. The silence in the war chamber stretched for several long moments. Admiral Tejo watched Haijin with growing interest, while the other commanders shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They had expected another voice of confidence, not this quiet challenge to their assumptions. Please, General Haijin, Tejo said finally, share your thoughts with the Council. Your experience with human forces could be valuable to our planning. Before Haijin could respond, Commander Su-min stood up again. Her young face showed the kind of certainty that only came from never having been truly tested in battle. If I may speak first, Admiral, Su-min said with a bright smile. I believe we are making this situation more complicated than it needs to be. One, have studied the reports of human military actions, and I see nothing that should concern experienced commanders like ourselves. She activated her personal datapad, and the room's display changed to show technical specifications of human weapons and ships. Look at their technology, Su-min continued, pointing at the display. They still use chemical propulsion for many of their ships. Their weapons fire solid metal projectiles. Their computers are generations behind our most basic systems. How can such primitive tools pose a threat to our advanced fleets? Captain Dongwu nodded enthusiastically and stood to add his own thoughts. Commander Su-min is absolutely right. I have seen recordings of human battle tactics and they are laughable. They charge straight at enemy positions like wild beasts. There is no strategy, no planning, just chaos and noise. The young captain gestured dramatically as he spoke. In my last campaign against the rebel colonies in the Outer Rim, we faced enemies with similar primitive weapons. My ships destroyed them in less than an hour. Human forces would last even less time against proper military technology. General Wu Jin of the Altarian Empire joined the discussion, his deep voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded fleets for decades. Both commanders make excellent points, Wu Jin said. But I think we should also consider the strategic situation. Humans may have primitive technology, but they have shown some ability to coordinate large operations. However, this actually works in our favor. He stood and walked to the display, manipulating the controls to show human expansion patterns. See how they expand? They spread their forces thin across many systems instead of concentrating power in key locations. This is a classic mistake that young species make. They think controlling more territory makes them stronger, but it actually makes them weaker. Wu Jin turned to face the other commanders with a confident expression. We can use this against them. A coordinated strike against 3 or 4 key systems would cut their territory in half. Their primitive communication systems would not be able to coordinate a proper response quickly enough. More commanders began to speak up, each adding their own analysis of human weaknesses. Colonel Hansal of the Meridian Alliance talked about how human ship designs were inefficient and wasteful. Major Soon-hee of the Crystal Hegemony explained how human ground forces lacked proper equipment and training. I have read reports about human soldiers, Soon-hee said with obvious amusement. They carry their own food and water into battle instead of using proper supply lines. They sleep on the ground instead of in proper facilities. They even carry photographs of their families into combat zones. This is not the behavior of professional soldiers. The room filled with laughter again. Several commanders began sharing their own stories about strange human customs they had heard about. They talked about human emotional attachments to inanimate objects, their tendency to name their weapons and ships, and their habit of creating ceremony around everything. Young. Lieutenant Bo Young of the Stellar Federation raised her hand tentatively. I have heard that humans refuse to surrender even when they are clearly defeated. Is this not just stubbornness rather than military strength? Captain Dongwu laughed loudly at this question. Exactly. They are too stupid to know when they have lost. This makes them predictable, not dangerous. A proper military force knows when to retreat and regroup. Humans just throw away their soldiers' lives for no strategic gain. Admiral Tejo listened to all of these assessments with growing satisfaction. This was exactly the kind of confident analysis he had hoped to hear from his commanders. The human problem could be solved with a coordinated military response using proper tactics and superior technology. These are all excellent observations, Tejo said, raising his hand to quiet the room. It sounds like we have a clear understanding of human capabilities and limitations. Now we need to discuss specific operational plans. He activated a new display showing potential target systems in human space. Intelligence suggests that hitting these 5 systems simultaneously would cripple human expansion efforts. We could divide our combined fleets into task forces, with each force targeting one system. Commander Su-min studied the display eagerly. Admiral, my fleet could take this system here, she said, pointing to a red dot near the edge of human space. According to our intelligence, it is defended by only 6 human ships. My battle group could overwhelm them easily. I want the system with their largest industrial facility, Captain Dongwu added quickly. My ships need some real combat experience, and crushing a human manufacturing center would be good practice for my crews. The commanders began dividing up targets like they were planning a training exercise. They discussed which ships to use, how long each operation would take, and what to do with captured human facilities. The mood in the room was celebratory, as if the war had already been won. Through all of this discussion, Haijin remained silent. She watched her colleagues plan their easy victory over the humans with growing unease. Their confidence reminded her so much of her own attitude before her first encounter with human forces. She remembered standing in a similar room years ago, making similar plans with similar confidence. She had been absolutely certain that her superior Kaleri technology and training would make short work of any human resistance. The battle had been planned as a simple demonstration of power, a way to show the humans that resistance was futile. Instead, it had become the worst defeat of her career. Admiral Tejo was now asking for volunteers to lead the different task forces. Hands shot up around the room as commanders competed for the honor of striking the first blow against human forces. "This enthusiasm is exactly what we need," Tejo said with satisfaction. "With this level of coordination and commitment, we can end the human expansion in a matter of weeks." He looked around the room one more time, his gaze settling on Hyjin. She was the only commander who had not volunteered for a task force assignment. She sat quietly in her chair, watching the proceedings with an unreadable expression. "General Hyjin," Tejo said again, his voice carrying a slight note of impatience. "You have been very quiet during our planning session. Do you have any concerns about our operational strategy?" The room grew quiet again as all attention focused on Hyjin. The other commanders looked at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to mild annoyance. They wanted her to confirm their plans, to add her voice to their chorus of confidence. Hyjin stood slowly, her movements careful and deliberate. She looked around the room at all the eager faces, at all the confident expressions, at all the hands that had volunteered to lead attacks against human forces. "Admiral," she said quietly, "you asked me earlier whether I should sit this one out or speak from experience." Tejo nodded. "Yes, General. We would very much like to hear your thoughts on our plans." Hyjin took a deep breath and touched the scars on her face unconsciously. "Then I suppose I should tell you about the first time I fought humans." Hyjin placed both hands on the table in front of her, letting the room see the deep scars that ran across her knuckles and up her wrists. The confident chatter died away completely as the other commanders noticed the extent of her battle damage. For the first time. "It was 3 years ago," she began, her voice steady and clear. "The Battle of Kepler 442b, intelligence had reported a single human patrol vessel operating in the system. One ship, maybe 50 crew members. My orders were simple: destroy the vessel and secure the system for Kaleri mining operations." "Admiral." Tejo leaned forward with interest. This sounded like exactly the kind of easy victory they were planning for their own operations. "I brought 12 ships," Hyjin continued. "Kaleri heavy cruisers, the best in our fleet. Each ship carried advanced plasma cannons, particle beam weapons, and quantum shields. My crews were veterans who had fought in the Altarian border wars. We had never lost a battle." She paused and looked around the room. The commanders were listening intently now, expecting to hear about a quick and decisive victory that would support their own confident plans. "When we arrived in the system, we found the human ship exactly where intelligence said it would be. It was smaller than our smallest vessel, with armor that looked like it was made from scrap metal. The weapons were obvious projectile systems, probably firing solid slugs. My tactical officer laughed when he saw it." Commander Sumin smiled, as he should have. "One primitive ship against 12 advanced cruisers? The battle must have lasted minutes. It lasted 6 hours, Hyjin said quietly. The smile disappeared from Sumin's face. Around the room, commanders shifted uncomfortably in their seats. 6 hours? Captain Dongwu asked with disbelief. "How is that possible? Were there other ships hidden in the system?" "No," Hyjin replied, "just the one human vessel. But that ship and its crew taught me things about warfare that no military academy had ever covered." She activated her personal display, showing a tactical map of the Kepler 442b system. Red icons marked the positions of her 12 ships at the start of the battle. A single blue icon showed the human vessel. The human captain was named Minho. I learned his name later from the wreckage of my own ships. When my fleet appeared, I expected him to surrender immediately. Any rational commander would have done so. Instead, he sent a message to my flagship. Hyjin touched a control, and an audio recording began to play. The voice was young and calm, speaking in accented but clear galactic standard language. Kaleri? Fleet, this is Captain Minho of the human vessel Defiant. You are entering human space without permission. Turn around and leave, or we will be forced to engage. The recording ended. Several commanders in the war chamber began to laugh, but the laughter died quickly when they saw Hyjin's expression. I thought it was a joke, she said. One small ship threatening 12 heavy cruisers. I ordered my fleet to advance and destroy the human vessel. That was my first mistake. The tactical display began to move, showing the progression of the battle. The 12 red icons moved toward the single blue one in a standard attack formation. The human ship did not try to run, it did not try to hide. Instead, it charged straight at my flagship. My tactical officer said the humans were committing suicide. I thought he was right. The blue icon on the display moved directly toward the center of the Kaleri formation, seemingly heading for certain destruction. Captain Minho started firing when he was still far outside effective range for his weapons. Solid metal projectiles that should have bounced harmlessly off our shields. But something was wrong with the way he was firing. Hyjin touched another control, and the display zoomed in to show the human ship's attack pattern. Instead of firing in straight lines, the projectiles followed complex curved paths. He was not firing at our ships. He was firing at our projectiles. Every missile we launched, every plasma bolt we fired, he shot down with those primitive kinetic weapons. His accuracy was impossible. No computer system could calculate firing solutions that complex. General Wu Jin frowned at the display. That makes no sense. Organic beings cannot process targeting data that quickly. I thought the same thing, Hyjin said. So I ordered my ships to spread out and attack from multiple angles. Surely he could not defend against 12 ships firing from different directions. The display showed the Kaleri ships moving into a wider formation surrounding the human vessel. Then the blue icon began to move in ways that defied all tactical logic. Captain Minho did something I had never seen before. He flew his ship through the middle of my formation, weaving between my cruisers like they were standing still. He was pulling acceleration forces that should have killed his entire crew, making turns that should have torn his ship apart. The blue icon danced through the red formation, and suddenly one of the red icons disappeared. The Righteous Fury, one of my best ships, just exploded. No warning, no apparent damage. Captain Minho had somehow fired a single projectile through a gap in their shields. That was only open for a fraction of a second. More red icons began to disappear from the display as the battle continued. Commander Sumin stared at the tactical map with growing alarm. How was he targeting your ship so precisely? She asked. I asked myself the same question, Hyjin replied. I recorded every moment of the battle, analyzed every sensor reading. It took me months to understand what I was seeing. She paused and looked directly at Sumin. Captain Minho was not using computers to calculate his attacks. He was doing it all in his head, in real time, while pulling forces that would have knocked most species unconscious. The room was completely silent now. The tactical display showed the progressive destruction of the Kaleri fleet, with a single human ship moving through them like a predator among prey. By the 4th hour of the battle, I had lost 8 ships. My remaining vessels were damaged and running low on ammunition. The human ship showed signs of damage but was still fighting with the same impossible intensity. Captain Dongwu raised his hand tentatively. General, what happened to your flagship? Hyjin touched the scars on her face unconsciously. Captain Minho saved my ship for last. When it was just my flagship against his damaged vessel, he could have destroyed us easily. Instead, he opened a communication channel. Another audio recording began to play. The same calm voice, but now obviously strained and tired. Kaleri flagship, this is Captain Minho. Your fleet is defeated. Surrender now, and I will allow you to evacuate your surviving crew. The human was offering me terms, Hyjin said quietly. After destroying 8 of my ships, he was giving me a chance to save the lives of my remaining crew. Admiral Tejo leaned forward. What did you do? I refused, of course. My pride would not allow me to surrender to a single human ship, so Captain Minho finished the battle. The display showed the final moments of the engagement. The human ship made one last impossible maneuver, somehow getting behind the Kaleri flagship and firing a single, perfectly aimed shot. He could have destroyed my ship completely. Instead, he disabled our engines and weapon systems with surgical precision. Then he did something that still confuses me. Hyjin activated one final recording. Captain Minho's voice was barely audible now, clearly speaking through damaged communication equipment. General Hyjin, I am transmitting the location of a medical station in neutral space. Your crew needs attention, and my ship is too damaged to provide assistance. Take your people there and get them help. The recording ended. Hyjin looked around the room at the stunned faces of her fellow commanders. A human captain who had just defeated my entire fleet was giving me directions to medical aid for my wounded crew. He could have taken prisoners, demanded surrender, or simply left us to die. Instead, he helped us. She stood up slowly, letting the weight of her story settle over the room. That was the first time I fought humans. It was not the last. The war chamber remained silent for long moments after Hyjin finished her account. The confident atmosphere from earlier had evaporated completely. Several commanders stared at the tactical display, trying to understand how a single human ship could have defeated 12 advanced cruisers. Admiral Tejo was the first to speak. General, that is a remarkable story. But surely this Captain Minho was exceptional even by human standards. One unusual enemy does not represent an entire species. Hyjin nodded slowly. I thought the same thing, Admiral. After the battle of Kepler 442b, I convinced myself that Captain Minho was a unique case. Perhaps he was genetically modified or using some secret technology my sensors could not detect. I requested permission to study human tactics and prepare for future encounters. She activated her display again, showing a new star map. This one was marked with multiple battle sites, each labeled with dates spanning 2 years. The Kaleri High. Command gave me a full fleet and orders to establish a forward base in human space. They wanted to test human defenses and gather intelligence for a larger invasion. I was confident that understanding human methods would make future battles easier. Commander Su-min looked at the display with growing concern. How many battles did you fight? 17 major engagements over 18 months, Hyjin replied. Each time, I thought I had learned enough to defeat human forces. Each time, the humans taught me something new about warfare. She highlighted one of the battle sites on the display. The Siege of New Bizan was my first lesson in human defensive tactics. Intelligence reported a small human colony on a mining world defended by perhaps 200 soldiers. The planet had strategic value because of its rare mineral deposits. The display zoomed in to show the planet and its surrounding space. I brought a full assault fleet, 30 ships, 5,000 ground troops, orbital bombardment capability. The plan was simple. Destroy the planetary defenses, land my forces, and occupy the mining facilities. Captain Dongwu studied the tactical situation. That seems like overwhelming force for such a small target. What went wrong? Everything, Hyjin said with a bitter smile. The humans had turned the entire planet into a weapon. The display changed to show a detailed map of the planet's surface. What should have been a simple mining colony was revealed as a complex network of fortified positions, underground tunnels, and hidden weapons emplacements. The human commander was Colonel Hyun-soo. His forces had been preparing for an attack for months. They had turned mining equipment into artillery, processing facilities into fortresses, and supply tunnels into troop movement networks, she pointed to various locations on the planetary map. Every building was a potential weapons position. Every tunnel could hide soldiers or supplies. The humans had even weaponized their mining explosives, turning industrial charges into massive defensive bombs. General Wu Jin frowned at the display. But surely orbital bombardment would have neutralized most of these defenses? I tried that. First, Haijin replied. 3 days of continuous bombardment from orbit. My ships fired enough energy to glass the entire planet's surface. When the bombardment ended, I was confident that no human could have survived. The display showed the aftermath of the orbital attack. Large sections of the planet's surface were cratered and burning, but many structures remained intact. The humans had built their defenses underground, using the planet's natural cave systems and their own mining tunnels. My bombardment had damaged some facilities, but the main defensive network was still operational. She activated a recording of radio communications from the battle. A calm human voice spoke through static and interference. Kaleri Fleet, this is Colonel Hyunsu. Your bombardment has been noted. We are still here, and we are still ready to fight. Land your troops whenever you are ready. Lieutenant Bio Young shook her head in disbelief. They invited you to attack after surviving orbital bombardment? Human psychology is different from ours, Haijin explained. Where we see hopeless odds, they see an interesting challenge. I landed my ground forces, expecting to face scattered survivors hiding in ruins. The display changed to show the ground. Battle. Red icons representing Kaleri troops spread across the planet's surface, while blue icons showed human defensive positions. The first day of ground combat, I lost 300 soldiers. The second day, I lost 400 more. The humans were not just defending their positions. They were hunting my troops. She highlighted specific areas on the map where major battles had occurred. Sergeant Jeet-1 was particularly effective. She was a mining explosives expert who had volunteered for combat duty. She turned the entire northern sector into a maze of hidden bombs and traps. The display showed a complex network of underground passages and hidden chambers. Sergeant G1 would attack my forces, then disappear into the tunnel network. My troops would pursue her, only to find themselves surrounded by explosives or cut off from support. Captain Dongwu studied the tactical situation with growing respect. How long did the siege last? 6 months, Haijin said quietly. 6 months of fighting for every building, every tunnel, every room. The humans never retreated, never surrendered, never asked for terms. They fought as if the fate of their entire species depended on holding that one mining world. She activated another recording, this one showing combat footage from Kaleri helmet cameras. The images were chaotic and violent, showing human soldiers fighting with an intensity that bordered on madness. Watch their faces, Haijin said as the recording played. Look at their expressions during combat. The footage showed human defenders in desperate situations, outnumbered and outgunned, but still fighting with fierce determination. Their faces showed no fear, no desperation, only cold focus and absolute commitment. I have fought many species across the galaxy, Haijin continued. All of them showed normal psychological responses to combat stress. Fear, anger, desperation, confusion. But humans in battle show something different. She paused the recorder. On the face of a young human soldier who was fighting 3 Kaleri warriors simultaneously. Despite being wounded and clearly outmatched, the human's expression was calm and determined. They fight as if they have already accepted death, but refuse to give up anyway. It is not bravery or courage in any sense I understand. It is something else entirely. Major Seung-hee raised her hand. General, how did the siege end? Did you eventually break their defenses? Haijin's expression grew dark. The humans ended it themselves. After 6 months of fighting, Colonel Hyunsu sent me a message. He said his forces were running low on supplies and ammunition. He offered to discuss surrender terms. Admiral Taeho leaned forward with interest. Finally, a reasonable response. To overwhelming odds? I thought so too, Haijin replied. I agreed to meet with Colonel Hyunsu in a neutral location to negotiate their surrender. It seemed like a reasonable end to a pointless siege. She activated the display one final time, showing the meeting location and the positions of both forces. The meeting was a trap, but not the kind I expected. Colonel Hyunsu did want to surrender, but only to protect the civilian population. He offered to give up the military resistance in exchange for guaranteed safety for the mining families. The display showed the final battle positions. Human forces were concentrated around the civilian shelters, with all military assets positioned between the civilians and Kaleri troops. While we were negotiating, Sergeant G1 was preparing her final surprise. She had spent 6 months placing explosives throughout the mining tunnels, turning the entire underground network into one massive bomb. Haijin's voice grew quiet as she described the end of the siege. Colonel Hyensu's surrender was real, but it was also cover for the evacuation of civilians. While I was accepting his surrender, human transport ships were secretly moving families to safety. She paused and looked around the room at the stunned faces of her fellow commanders. When the evacuation was complete, Sergeant G1 detonated her explosives. The entire planetary mining operation disappeared in a series of explosions that could be seen from orbit. She destroyed the very thing we had come to capture, making our victory worthless. The display went dark, leaving the room in uncomfortable silence. The humans did not fight to win, Haijin concluded. They fought to make sure we could not win either, and they were willing to sacrifice everything, including their own lives, to achieve that goal. The atmosphere in the war chamber had changed completely. The confident laughter and casual dismissal of human capabilities had been replaced by uncomfortable silence and worried expressions. Admiral Tejo looked around the room, seeing doubt in faces that had been full of certainty just hours before. General Haijin, he said carefully, these experiences you describe are certainly concerning, but they represent defensive actions by humans protecting their own territory. Surely their offensive capabilities are more limited? Haijin's expression grew even more serious. She touched the deeper scars on her right arm, the ones that ran from her wrist to her elbow in parallel lines. That brings me to my final encounter with human forces, she said quietly. The Battle of Titan's Gate, it was 18 months ago, and it taught me the most important lesson about fighting humans. She activated her display again, showing a star system with multiple planets and a large space station positioned near a gas giant. Titan's Gate was a major shipping hub, controlling trade routes through 3 sectors. The Galactic Trade Federation had asked for military protection after human raids began targeting merchant vessels. Commander Sumin leaned forward. Raids? That sounds like piracy, not military action. That is what we thought initially, Haijin replied. Intelligence suggested a small human force was operating out of the outer system, perhaps 20 ships attacking unarmed merchants. The Trade Federation requested a show of force to drive them away. The display showed the positions of various fleets around the system. I was given command of a coalition task force, 200 ships from 4 different species, including some of the most advanced vessels in known space. It was the largest fleet I had ever commanded. General Wu Jin studied the tactical display with interest. 200 ships against 20 raiders? That seems like sufficient force to handle any human threat. The human force was commanded by Admiral Kyungmin, Haijin continued. Intelligence files described him as a competent but unremarkable officer. Nothing in his record suggested exceptional ability or unusual tactics. She highlighted the outer system where human forces were believed to be hiding. Our plan was straightforward. Advance in 3 waves, sweep the outer system, destroy any human vessels we found, and establish permanent patrols to prevent future raids. The display began to animate, showing the movement of the coalition fleet toward the outer system. The first wave consisted of 80 ships, mostly heavy cruisers and battleships. They were to locate and engage the human raiders, while the second and third waves provided support. Captain Dongwu watched the tactical movement with professional interest. What happened when your first wave made contact? They found nothing, Haijin said simply. The outer system was empty. No human ships, no bases, no sign that anyone had ever been there. My scouts reported that the asteroid fields and gas giant moons showed no evidence of occupation. She paused the display and looked around the room. I should have recognized this as a warning sign. Humans do not simply abandon territory when faced with superior force. but I was confident that our show of strength had frightened them into retreating. Admiral Tejo nodded approvingly. A reasonable assumption. Superior force often achieves victory without battle. While my first wave was searching the outer system, Admiral Kyung-min struck the inner system, Haijin continued. The display shifted to show the area around Titan's Gate Station, where the Coalition's second and third waves were positioned. 50 human ships appeared from nowhere and attacked our rear positions, but they did not attack like any military force I had ever seen. The display showed the human attack pattern. Instead of a coordinated assault on specific targets, the human ships seemed to be moving randomly through the Coalition formation. Admiral Kyung-min was not trying to destroy our ships, Haijin explained. He was trying to break our formation and create chaos. His ships would attack briefly, then retreat before we could respond effectively. Commander Su-min frowned at the display. That sounds like hit-and-run tactics. Annoying, but not particularly dangerous to a large fleet. I thought the same thing, Haijin replied. I ordered my second wave to maintain formation and destroy the raiders systematically. That was when Admiral Kyung-min showed me what human tactical thinking really looked like. The display zoomed in to show the battle around Titan's Gate Station. The human ships were moving in patterns that seemed to have no tactical purpose, but Haijin highlighted specific movements with growing concern. Look at what the human ships were actually doing, she said, tracing their paths on the display. They were not just attacking randomly, they were herding our ships into specific positions. The Coalition fleet's formation began to compress and distort as ships maneuvered to avoid human attacks. What had started as an organized defensive arrangement became a tightly packed cluster of vessels. Admiral Kyung-min was positioning our entire fleet exactly where he wanted us, Haijin continued. Every human attack, every retreat, every apparent random movement was designed to push our ships closer together. Lieutenant Bo Young stared at the display in growing alarm. Why would he want your ships clustered together? Because he was about to do something that no sane military commander would ever attempt, Haijin replied. She highlighted several human ships on the display, all of which were showing signs of severe damage. Commander Ram was Admiral Kyung-min's tactical coordinator. She commanded 12 human ships that had been damaged in the initial attacks. According to standard military doctrine, these ships should have retreated for repairs. The display showed the damaged human vessels moving toward the clustered Coalition fleet. Instead, Commander Ram led her damaged ships directly into the center of our formation, not to attack, but to explode. Major Seung-hee gasped in shock. They deliberately destroyed their own ships? 12 human vessels detonated their reactor cores simultaneously, Haijin said quietly. The explosions happened in the exact center of our tightly packed formation. 37 Coalition ships were destroyed instantly, and another 50 were severely damaged. The display showed the devastating results of the human sacrifice attack. What had been an organized fleet was now a scattered collection of damaged and burning vessels. But that was not the end of Admiral Kyung-min's plan, Haijin continued. While we were dealing with the aftermath of the explosions, the remaining human ships began their real attack. The tactical display showed the surviving human vessels moving through the chaos with surgical precision. They did not target our strongest ships or our command vessels. Instead, they attacked our support ships, our supply vessels, our medical frigates. General Wu Jin watched in horror as the human forces systematically destroyed the Coalition's logistical backbone. They were crippling your ability to continue fighting. Exactly, Haijin confirmed. Within 2 hours, Admiral Kyung-min had turned a battle between 200 Coalition ships and 50 human raiders into a disaster for our forces. We had lost over 100 vessels, and the survivors were stranded without supplies or support. She paused the display and looked directly at Admiral Tejo. At that point, I received a communication from Admiral Kyung-min. He offered to accept our surrender and provide safe passage out of the system for our surviving crews. The room was completely silent. Admiral Tejo's confident expression had been replaced by obvious concern. "What did you do?" he asked quietly. "I accepted," Haijin replied without shame. "I had lost most of my fleet, my remaining ships were damaged and running low on supplies, and I was facing an enemy who had just demonstrated tactical abilities that I could not match." She activated one final recording. A calm human voice spoke. Through clear communications, "Coalition Fleet, this is Admiral Kyungmin. Your surrender is accepted. Please begin evacuation procedures immediately. Our medical ships will assist with your wounded." The humans kept their word, Haijin continued. They provided medical aid, safe passage, and even shared supplies with our damaged ships. Admiral Kyungmin personally ensured that every coalition survivor reached friendly territory safely. She stood up slowly and looked around the room at the stunned faces of her fellow commanders. "That was the day I learned the most important lesson about fighting humans," she said quietly. "They do not just fight to win battles. They fight to win wars that have not even started yet." Every engagement, every tactic, every sacrifice is part of a larger strategy that most species cannot comprehend. The scars on her arms seemed to stand out more prominently as she continued. "Admiral Kyungmin did not just defeat our fleet at Titan's Gate, he sent a message to every military force in the galaxy about what happens when you underestimate human capabilities." She touched the control that shut down the tactical display, leaving the room in darkness except for the emergency lighting. And that message was heard. The emergency lighting cast long shadows across the war chamber, making the assembled commanders look like ghosts of their former confident selves. Admiral Tejo sat in silence for several minutes, processing what he had heard. When he finally spoke, his voice carried none of its earlier authority. "General Haijin," he said slowly, "what you described challenges everything we know about military science. How can one species be so different from every other form of organized warfare in the galaxy?" Haijin remained standing, her scarred hands still visible in the dim light. "That question kept me awake for months after Titan's Gate. I spent my recovery time studying everything I could find about human history, psychology, and evolution. What I learned changed my understanding of warfare itself." She activated her personal datapad and the main display illuminated again. This time it showed not battle maps or tactical formations, but evolutionary trees and biological data. "Humans are unique among spacefaring species in one crucial way," she began. "Every other intelligent race we have encountered evolved as either predators or prey. We developed our intelligence to hunt more effectively or to avoid being hunted more successfully." Commander Sumin leaned forward, her earlier confidence replaced by genuine curiosity. "Are you saying humans are different in their evolutionary development?" "Humans evolved as both predator and prey simultaneously," Haijin explained. The display showed comparative data about various species and their evolutionary paths. On their homeworld, humans were hunted by larger, stronger creatures, but they were also pack hunters who brought down prey many times their individual size. She highlighted specific data points on the evolutionary comparison. This dual nature created psychological traits that no other species possesses. Humans can think like prey when they need to survive, and like predators when they need to attack. They can switch between these mindstates instantly, sometimes even combining them. General Wu Jin studied the displayed information with growing unease. "What does this mean in practical terms for military operations?" "It means humans approach every conflict as if their species' survival depends on the outcome," Haijin replied. "Even minor skirmishes, even small raids, even simple patrol encounters are treated as life-or-death struggles." The display changed to show recordings from various human battles, each showing the same pattern of absolute commitment regardless of the strategic importance of the engagement. "Watch their behavior in combat," Haijin continued. "Other species fight harder when the stakes are higher. Humans fight with maximum intensity regardless of the situation. They cannot dial down their commitment to survival." Captain Dongwu watched the combat footage with obvious discomfort. That explains their willingness to sacrifice themselves, but how does it make them more effective fighters? Because it gives them what military theorists call escalation. Dominance, Hyjin explained. In any conflict, humans are automatically willing to accept higher costs than their opponents. They will sacrifice more, risk more, and endure more to achieve their objectives. She activated a new display showing game theory models and strategic calculations. Every other species in the galaxy conducts warfare based on cost-benefit analysis. We fight until the cost exceeds the potential benefit, then we seek other solutions. Lieutenant Bet O-Young nodded in understanding. That is rational military thinking. Why commit resources to battles that are not worth winning? Humans do not think that way, Hyjin said simply. For them, every battle is worth winning because every battle represents a threat to their survival. They cannot accept losses the way other species do. The display showed comparative analyses of human versus non-human military doctrines. The differences were stark and disturbing. Look at their strategic planning, Hyjin continued. Other species plan for victory, defeat, or negotiated settlement. Human military doctrine only includes two options: total victory or total defeat. There is no middle ground in their thinking. Major Seung-hee raised her hand tentatively. But surely that makes them predictable? If they always choose the most extreme option, we should be able to plan for that. That is what I thought, Hyjin replied with a bitter smile. But human extremism is not predictable because they combine it with tactical creativity that no other species possesses. She activated recordings from her own battles, showing human tactical decisions that seem to defy logic. Remember, Captain Minho at Kepler 442b? He chose to fight 12 ships with one vessel. That decision was both extremely rational and completely insane. The recording showed the impossible maneuvers and split-second decisions that had defeated Hyjin's first fleet. Rational because it was his only chance of victory. Insane because no other species would have attempted it. Commander Su-min watched the tactical replay with growing respect. How do they make such complex calculations under combat stress? That brings me to another unique aspect of human psychology, Hyjin said. Humans actually perform better under extreme stress. Where other species become confused or paralyzed by combat pressure, humans become more focused and creative. The display showed brain scan data comparing different species under stress conditions. Human brain patterns were dramatically different from all others. Their brains release chemicals during combat that enhance reaction time, pattern recognition, and creative problem solving. The more desperate their situation becomes, the more effectively they think. General Wu Jin stared at the brain scan data in disbelief. Are you saying that humans become more intelligent when they are about to die? In a sense, yes, Hyjin confirmed. Their evolution as both predator and prey created neurochemical responses that treat life-threatening situations as puzzles to be solved rather than disasters to be endured. She activated footage from the siege of New Bizan, showing human defenders creating impossible solutions to tactical problems. Look at Sergeant G1's explosive traps. She spent 6 months turning an entire planet into a weapon while under constant bombardment and ground assault. The tactical displays showed the intricate network of tunnels, bombs, and defensive positions that had held off Kaleri forces for half a year. No military academy teaches these techniques because no other species thinks this way under pressure. Captain Dongwu studied the defensive layouts with professional admiration. The complexity is incredible. How many specialists would it take to plan something like this? One human mining engineer with a few months to prepare, Hyjin replied. Sergeant G1 designed and implemented the entire defensive network herself while fighting a war for survival. The room fell silent as the commanders absorbed the implications of what they were hearing. Admiral Taeho was the first to break the silence. General, what you are describing suggests that humans are essentially undefeatable in conventional warfare. How can any species compete with opponents who become more effective as situations become more desperate? Hyjin looked around the room. at the worried faces of her fellow commanders. That is the question that kept me awake for months. But I eventually found an answer, though it is not one that any of you will want to hear. She activated a final display showing strategic analyses of long-term human expansion patterns. The only way to defeat humans is to avoid fighting them entirely. Their psychology makes them unbeatable in direct conflict, but it also makes them reasonable in negotiations. Commander Su-min looked confused. How can they be both unreasonable fighters and reasonable negotiators? Because fighting and negotiating serve different purposes in human psychology, Hyjin explained. They fight to survive, but they negotiate to build alliances and partnerships. Humans actually prefer cooperation when it does not threaten their survival instincts. The display showed examples of human diplomatic successes and peaceful trade relationships. Look at their interactions with species that chose cooperation over confrontation. Humans have become valuable allies and trading partners when they do not feel threatened. She paused and looked directly at Admiral Tejo. But once you choose to fight humans, you have activated their survival psychology. At that point, they will not stop until they have eliminated the threat completely. The implications of her words settled over the room like a dark cloud. Admiral Tejo sat back in his chair, his earlier confidence completely gone. So what are you recommending, General? He asked quietly. Hyjin's expression was grave as she prepared to deliver her final assessment. I am recommending that we very carefully consider whether we want to start a war that we may not be able to finish. Admiral Tejo stood up slowly, his movements betraying the weight of everything he had heard. The confident military leader who had opened the meeting was gone, replaced by someone who looked genuinely troubled by the strategic situation. General Hyjin, he said carefully, your experiences with human forces are clearly extensive and concerning. But as military commanders, we cannot simply ignore human expansion because fighting them is difficult. What specific recommendations do you have for this council? Hyjin remained standing, her scarred hands clasped behind her back in a formal military posture. Admiral, you asked me to speak from experience. My experience tells me that any war against humans will cost exponentially more than we are prepared to pay. She gestured toward the tactical displays that still showed the aftermath of her defeats. Look at the numbers from my encounters. At Kepler 442b, 12 advanced cruisers versus 1 human patrol ship. Result, 8 ships lost, 4 damaged beyond repair. At New Bizan, 5,000 troops versus 200 defenders. Result, 6 months of siege warfare and strategic defeat. Commander Su-min shifted uncomfortably in her seat. But General, those were individual battles. Surely a coordinated campaign with proper planning would achieve different results? That brings me. T.O. Titan's Gate, Hyjin replied grimly. 200 ships from 4 different species, carefully coordinated, with overwhelming technological superiority. Against 50 human raiders using outdated equipment. She activated the final tactical display from that battle, showing the devastating results of Admiral Kyungmin's strategy. Result, over 100 ships lost, fleet logistics completely destroyed, total strategic defeat in less than 6 hours. The numbers hung in the air like an accusation. General Wu Jin studied the display with growing alarm. General, what are you saying? That humans are militarily invincible? I'm saying that humans do not fight the same war we think we are fighting, Hyjin replied. When we plan military operations, we calculate acceptable losses, strategic objectives, and exit strategies. Humans plan for total victory or total destruction, with no consideration for acceptable losses. She highlighted specific aspects of human tactical doctrines on the display. Every human military engagement serves multiple purposes. They are fighting the current battle, gathering intelligence for future battles, and sending psychological messages to potential enemies. Captain Dongwu leaned forward with interest. What kind of messages? Admiral Kyungmin's victory at Titan's Gate was not just about defeating our fleet, Hyjin explained. It was about demonstrating to every species in the galaxy that humans can turn any tactical disadvantage into strategic victory through sheer willingness to sacrifice. The display showed news reports and intelligence analyses from across known space, all discussing the implications of the human victory at Titan's Gate. Within weeks of that battle, 3 different species signed non-aggression pacts with humanity. 2 others offered trade agreements. The humans gained more territory through diplomacy after one battle than they had conquered in the previous year. Lieutenant Baoyoung looked confused. Are you saying they fight wars to avoid fighting wars? I'm saying they understand something about galactic politics that we have missed, Hyjin replied. Humans know that reputation is more valuable than territory. They would rather be feared and respected than constantly fighting new enemies. She activated recordings of post-battle communications from human commanders, all emphasizing the same themes of strength through cooperation and the costs of confrontation. Listen to their diplomatic messages after military victories, Hyjin continued. They always offer partnership and mutual benefit to their former enemies. But the subtext is clear. Cooperation is preferable to the alternative. Admiral Teho studied the diplomatic communications with growing understanding. So, human military strategy is actually designed to minimize future conflicts? Exactly, Hyjin confirmed. They fight with such intensity and tactical creativity that other species choose negotiation over warfare. It is psychological warfare on a galactic scale, Major Sung. He raised her hand. General, what about human expansion? They are still taking new territory and building new bases. How is that different from traditional conquest? Because humans expand into unclaimed or disputed territory, Hyjin explained. They avoid direct confrontation with established powers whenever possible. Look at their expansion patterns over the past 5 years. The display showed human territorial growth highlighted against existing galactic boundaries. They have taken 47 systems, but only 3 were previously claimed by other species. And in all 3 cases, they negotiated compensation or territorial exchanges. Commander Sumin studied the expansion data carefully. That still represents a significant increase in human power and influence. Yes, but achieved through economic and diplomatic pressure rather than military conquest, Hyjin replied. Humans prefer to buy territory or trade for it. They only fight when other species force them to fight. She paused and looked around the room at the troubled faces of her fellow commanders. Which brings me to my final recommendation for this council. Admiral Teho nodded for her to continue. If we attack human territory, we will not be fighting a war of conquest, Hyjin said quietly. We will be fighting a war of species survival, from the human perspective. And in that kind of war, humans become something that no military force in the galaxy can defeat. The room was completely silent as the implications of her words sank in. General Wu Jin was the first to speak. General, are you recommending that we simply allow human expansion to continue unchecked? I am recommending that we approach humans as potential partners rather than inevitable enemies, Hyjin replied. Every species that has chosen cooperation over confrontation has benefited from human trade, technology, and protection. She activated displays showing successful human alliances and trading relationships. The Centauri Collective increased their economic output by 30% after signing trade agreements with humanity. The Vegan Republic gained access to human medical technology that extended their average lifespan by 15 years. Captain Dongwu looked at the economic data with obvious interest. What do humans want in exchange for these benefits? Peaceful coexistence and fair trade, Hyjin said simply. They offer protection from other threats, access to their technology and markets, and guaranteed territorial integrity. In exchange, they want the same guarantees and open access to resources they need for continued expansion. Lieutenant Baoyoung frowned at the display. That sounds too good to be true. What is the catch? The catch is that you have to mean it, Hyjin replied seriously. Humans have an uncanny ability to detect deception and hidden agendas. Any attempt to manipulate or betray them results in immediate termination of all agreements. She highlighted. Several examples of failed attempts to deceive human negotiators. The Rigel Consortium tried to sell humans defective mining equipment while secretly planning to reclaim the territory later. Human intelligence detected the deception within weeks, and the consortium lost all trading privileges permanently. Admiral Tejo absorbed this information with growing concern. General, what you are describing sounds less like diplomacy and more like surrender. Hai Jin turned to face him directly, her scarred face showing the weight of hard-earned experience. Admiral, I have fought humans in 3 major campaigns. I have lost ships, soldiers, and nearly my own life learning about their capabilities. What I am describing is not surrender. She gestured toward the tactical displays showing her defeats. What I'm describing is the recognition that humans offer 2 choices to every species they encounter: partnership or war. Partnership brings mutual benefit and shared prosperity. War brings total defeat and the eventual necessity of accepting partnership anyway, but from a much weaker position. The room remained silent as the assembled commanders considered her words. Admiral Tejo looked around at his fellow officers, seeing doubt and concern where there had been confidence just hours before. General Hai Jin, he said finally, if we choose to pursue diplomatic contact with human leadership, what do you think they will offer? Hai Jin's expression softened slightly. Based on my observations, they will offer exactly what they have offered every other species: fair trade, mutual defense agreements, and guaranteed territorial integrity. But they will also make it clear that these offers come with expectations of good faith and honest dealing. She paused and looked around the room one final time. The question this council must answer is simple. Do we want to be human allies? Or do we want to learn the hard way why every species that has fought them eventually chose to become human allies anyway? The weight of that question settled over the war chamber like a heavy blanket, and Admiral Tejo realized that the easy military solution he had hoped for was not going to be possible. The war chamber fell into a heavy silence that stretched for several minutes. Admiral Tejo looked around the room at faces that showed confusion, concern, and in some cases, outright fear. The confident military gathering he had planned had become something entirely different. Finally, Commander Su-min broke the silence. General Hai Jin, I need to ask you directly. Are you recommending that this council abandon all military options against human expansion? Hai Jin remained standing, her bearing still formal despite the informal nature of the question. Commander, I am recommending that this council understand the true cost of military action before choosing that path. She gestured toward the tactical displays that still showed the results of her encounters with human forces. If we decide to fight humans, we must be prepared for casualties unlike anything we have experienced. We must be prepared for battles that last months instead of days. We must be prepared for enemies who will sacrifice anything to achieve victory. Captain Dongwu shifted uncomfortably in his seat. But General, military commanders cannot simply avoid difficult battles because they are costly. Sometimes we must fight regardless of the price. You are absolutely correct, Hai Jin agreed. The question is whether stopping human expansion is worth the price we will pay, and whether we will actually succeed in stopping them or just teach them to hate us. General Wu Jin leaned forward with a troubled expression. What do you mean by that last part? Humans have one psychological trait that is more dangerous than their tactical creativity or their willingness to sacrifice, Hai Jin explained. They have perfect memory for those who threaten their survival. She activated a new display showing historical data about human conflicts. Look at their military history on their own world. Humans fought wars that lasted decades, sometimes centuries. They passed hatred and desire for revenge from generation to generation. The historical data showed conflicts that spanned multiple generations, with human populations maintaining animosity for periods that exceeded the lifespans of most other species. If we attack human territory and fail to completely destroy their civilization, we will create an enemy that will never forgive and never forget. Hai Jin continued. Our children and grandchildren will inherit a war that we started but could not finish, Lieutenant Bo Young looked at the historical data with growing alarm. Are you saying that humans would pursue revenge across generations? I am saying that humans do not distinguish between individual enemies and species enemies, Hyjin replied. If the Kaleri Empire attacks humanity, then all Kaleri become enemies in human thinking. If we start a war, our entire species becomes responsible for that war in their minds. She highlighted specific examples from human history showing this pattern of species-wide accountability. This is why human alliances are so valuable and why human enmity is so dangerous. They think in terms of entire civilizations, not individual governments or military units. Admiral Tejo studied the display with obvious unease. General, are you suggesting that any military action against humans would result in permanent hostility? Unless we achieve total victory and complete destruction of human civilization, yes, Hyjin confirmed. Partial victories against humans are worse than defeats because they create long-term enemies with perfect memory and unlimited patience. The room erupted in concerned murmurs and whispered conversations. Several commanders began discussing the implications among themselves, their voices carrying worry and doubt. Major Seung-hee raised her hand to get attention. General, what about the possibility of limited engagement? Could we not test human defenses with small-scale operations to better understand their capabilities? Hyjin's expression grew dark. Major, there is no such thing as limited engagement with humans. Any attack, regardless of size, will be treated as an existential threat requiring unlimited response. She activated recordings from her own encounters, showing human responses to various levels of military pressure. At Kepler 442b, I sent 12 ships against one human patrol vessel. The humans responded as if I had attacked their homeworld. At New Bizin, I besieged a minor mining colony. The humans defended it as if it were their species' capital. The recordings clearly showed the same pattern of total commitment regardless of the strategic importance of the target. Humans cannot calibrate their response to match the threat level, Hyjin explained. Every threat is treated as maximum threat in their psychology. Commander Su Min looked at the data with growing understanding. So any military probe would trigger full human retaliation? Against not just the attacking force, but against the entire species that launched the attack, Hyjin confirmed. The humans would not distinguish between a limited probe and an invasion fleet. They would respond to both with everything they had? The implications settled over the room like a heavy weight. Admiral Tejo looked around at his fellow commanders, seeing the confidence that had started the meeting completely gone. I think we need to recess this session, he said quietly. These revelations require careful consideration and consultation with our respective governments. As commanders began to stand and gather their materials, the chamber door opened suddenly. A young officer in the uniform of the Stellar Federation rushed in, her face flushed with excitement and concern. Admiral Tejo, the officer said breathlessly. I apologize for the interruption, but urgent news has just arrived from the Vega sector. Admiral Tejo looked annoyed at the interruption. Captain Yunji, this had better be extremely important to justify disrupting a classified strategy session. Captain Yunji held out a datapad with shaking hands. Sir, human forces have just defeated a Kroden battle fleet in the Vega system. 28 Kroden ships versus 7 human vessels. The entire Kroden force was destroyed with no human losses. The room went completely silent. The Kroden were known throughout the galaxy as one of the most militarily advanced species, with technology that rivaled even the Velkan Confederation. How is that possible? Commander Su Min asked in a whisper. Captain Yunji activated the chamber's display and uploaded the battle data. According to sensor records from neutral observers, the human commander used some kind of new tactic. The Kroden ships just stopped working. All of them simultaneously. The tactical display showed the battle layout. 28 red icons representing Kroden ships surrounded 7 blue icons representing human vessels. Then, suddenly, all the red icons went dark. The humans apparently have developed some kind of electronic warfare capability that can disable multiple ships at once, Captain Yunji continued. After the Croton fleet was disabled, the human commander sent a message offering medical assistance and safe passage home. Hyjin stared at the battle data with a mixture of admiration and dread. They are still evolving their tactics, she sighed quietly. Still finding new ways to win battles that should be impossible. Admiral Tejo looked at the display showing the destroyed Croton fleet, then at Hyjin's scarred face, then at the worried expressions of his fellow commanders. Captain Yunji, he said slowly, please send a message to the Galactic Communications Authority. Request immediate diplomatic contact with human leadership for the purpose of discussing mutual trade and cooperation agreements. Commander Su-min looked shocked. Admiral, are you abandoning our military options entirely? Admiral Tejo stood up and looked around the room at all the assembled military commanders. After hearing General Hyjin's experiences and seeing this latest demonstration of human capabilities, I am choosing the option that preserves our species and our civilization. He gestured toward the tactical display showing the destroyed Croton fleet. We came here planning to discuss military action against human expansion. Instead, we have learned that humans offer us two choices, partnership or destruction. General. Wujin nodded slowly. And partnership is clearly the preferable option. As the commanders began to file out of the chamber, discussing the implications of this decision among themselves, Commander Su-min approached Hyjin privately. General, she said quietly, what do you really think will happen now? Will the humans accept our diplomatic overtures after we have been planning military action against them? Hyjin looked at the young commander with an expression that mixed exhaustion with hard-earned wisdom. Commander, humans are remarkably forgiving of past hostility if they believe future intentions are genuine. But they are also remarkably good at detecting deception and false sincerity. She paused and looked back at the tactical display showing the latest human victory. If we approach them honestly, acknowledging our previous intentions and explaining our change of perspective, they will likely welcome us as allies. Humans respect former enemies who learn from their mistakes. Commander Su-min nodded thoughtfully. And if we had chosen to fight them? Hyjin's expression grew grave as she prepared to leave the chamber. Then we would have learned the hard way what every other species in the galaxy has discovered. Humans do not just fight wars. In the end, even if we had managed to destroy every human ship and occupy every human world, we would have discovered that we had not conquered humanity. She gathered her materials and headed toward the exit, her voice carrying clearly in the quiet chamber. We would have learned that humans do not surrender.